Bonza released some statistics this week on how successful or not they've been in Rockhampton. Jake, tell us a bit more.
Yeah, so Bonza says that since it started flying to and from Rockhampton on the 13th of March last year, it has flown more than 100,000 people into and out of Rockhampton. Now, what is interesting is that at the 2021 census, Rockhampton had just under 80,000 residents. So effectively, Bonza has had more Rockhampton passengers than the entire population of Rockhampton.
But that's really impressive because either the people of Rockhampton have been having children at an extraordinary rate and they've actually increased their population to such a point. Anyway, but what it means, obviously, is this is good for Rockhampton because they're bringing in tourists, really. They're actually, and this is an example of what Bonza said all along, is that you can have all the number crunches at the major airlines saying it will never work, but it's not until you put the flights on that you will see how successful or not they are. And you could well argue that Bonza, perhaps more than any other airline, it's going to do more to actually help the places they're flying from because these are new routes, these are new options that were not open before, and you can see how in a place like Rockhampton that's really important. What it also shows is if you are able to boost tourism in Rockhampton by as much as they have, the brand sort of affinity there will be very, very strong. And actually, all the routes they fly, people will be quite grateful for Bonza for putting on these options that didn't exist before.
Yeah, so Bonza at the moment flies from Rockhampton to Townsville, Cairns, Gold Coast, Melbourne and Sunshine Coast. Now, it is ditching the Townsville route at the end of the month due to low demand. But it seems evident that the other routes are still strong enough, at least at the moment, to sustain this significant presence in Rockhampton. And if we just check Rockhampton Airport on the old Wikipedia here,
the very highest sources at the Jake Nelson Experience. I mean, we stop at nothing for accuracy. Go on.
Exactly. Yes. If we check the Wikipedia page for Rockhampton Airport, we can find that Bonza is one of four airlines that serves Rockhampton. So Bonza has services to Cairns, Gold Coast, Melbourne, Sunshine Coast and Townsville, though Townsville is ending at the end of the month. QantasLink to Brisbane, Cairns, Mackay and Townsville, Skytrans Airlines to Cairns and Proserpine, and Virgin Australia to Brisbane. So, effectively, Bonza has come in and basically matched QantasLink's the number of destinations you could get by QantasLink. But it's opened up these new destinations as well. So Rockhampton to Cairns was served by QantasLink and Skytrans before this. But Gold Coast, Melbourne, Sunshine Coast were not served by any airline from Rockhampton. So you can now fly directly between Melbourne and Rockhampton, Gold Coast and Rockhampton, Sunshine Coast and Rockhampton, where you could not before, and it's all thanks to Bonza.
Well done, Bonza.
We have been having discussion as well, Adam. You might recall sort of off screen about whether Bonza should be looking to diversify its fleet. Because, on the one hand, you have the advantage, if it's all 737 MAX 8s, then you have the advantage of you only need to train your pilots on one aircraft type. On the other hand, if you have smaller aircraft in your fleet, like perhaps the E190, like the E-Jets, or like the A220, you can look at, putting on routes with these smaller sort of 100-seat range aircraft first, and then if the routes prove wildly successful, then you can upgrade them to the 737 MAX 8.
Yeah, exactly. Now, there's no exact science to, they call it like the load factors, right? So there's no exact science to what the percentage is, but generally speaking, you want to be aiming at kind of 75-80% full in order for this to make money. If you have a relatively larger aircraft like the 737 MAX, that means you need to get whatever it is, 170, 180 people on there for this thing to work. But firstly, Bonza are going to have a trouble with getting more Maxes in, which is something we've kind of already seen.
They're dry leasing 2 of their aircraft now from Flair.
Yeah, so they were initially aiming to have a fleet of 10 Maxes by the end of the year. Whether they're going to be able to do that or not, we don't know. Perhaps even they don't know. So in order for Bonza to expand, and Bonza need to expand to get to that break-even point, as we've discussed previously, it may be the case that they have to slightly change their strategy. Now, I think, as you said there before, taking on smaller aircraft is a very smart idea because it will open up so many new routes. And like you said as well, it may not just be the case that you're putting on routes which are sort of less popular. It may be the case that it's a little bit of a tester. Particularly what we saw before when Bonza started, they started all of this network, they started all these routes, and then sort of halfway or 2/3 of the way through the year, dumped a lot of them that weren't working. It makes
in particular, all of the services to Coffs Harbour, for example.
Yeah, exactly. It makes more sense to use these smaller aircraft to test things out. But it could also be the case that they take smaller aircraft and they could go back to some of the routes that they dumped that weren't economically viable, that then may be economically viable again.
Yeah, so, if the 737 MAX 8 didn't work out going to Coffs Harbour, but you have an E190 E2, there might be enough demand into Coffs Harbour to sustain, 100-seat E190 flights, 100-seat flights on an E-Jet or an A220. And you also... might consider, especially with Coffs Harbour, Tim Jordan, the CEO of Bonza, we had a story last year where he was complaining about the high airfares into Coffs Harbour, on the airlines that fly into Coffs Harbour now, which I think Rex and QantasLink. Bonza had pulled out of Coffs Harbour before then, but now the flights, as seen by Tim Jordan, to Coffs Harbour were very, very expensive. So if Bonza has a smaller plane like an E2 or an A220, and they fly it into Coffs Harbour, then that could be a way to, bring more competition into Coffs Harbour and serve the Coffs Harbour market, because Coffs Harbour indicated they were very keen to have Bonza back, and Bonza said, we are not shutting the door on Coffs Harbour. If Bonza has smaller planes, then they can serve the, perhaps maybe a lower demand destination in Coffs Harbour or a lower demand route from Coffs Harbour, without having to invest one of their 737 MAX 8s, of which they only have 6.
Well, Jake, as well as working on Australian Aviation, he does the Jake Nelson experience and the Jake Nelson consultancy. So, Tim, if you are listening and you do fancy working with the Jake Nelson consultancy, there you go. That's just a tidbit of what you're going to get.
Our lawyers have advised me to say that my advice is only opinion, and that if you take my advice and fail, then that's really on you.